Look at your nightstand right now. Memory foam pillow, blackout curtains, maybe a white noise app, and a $40 weighted blanket. We treat good sleep like a problem we just invented solutions for in the last decade. Now picture an Egyptian noble in 2600 BC, lying down for the night with his head resting on a block of carved stone. No pillow, no mattress, really, just a woven mat and a curved piece of limestone under his skull. Sounds insane. Sounds like the opposite of comfort, except when you actually look at what that stone was doing and why they believed sleep worked the way it did, you start to realize something uncomfortable. They weren't behind us. In some ways, they'd already figured out the basics we're still relearning in sleep labs today. Let's start with the object itself. The wurs, what we'd call a headrest. It shows up in Egyptian tombs from the very start of their history all the way through to the end of the dynastic period. Roughly 3,000 years of continuous use. It's a flat base with a curved cradle on top, shaped to fit the back of the skull, usually carved from wood, ivory, or stone. At first glance, it looks like deliberate self-punishment, but the design solves three real problems at once. First, in a hot climate, a solid stone or wood support lets air circulate freely around the head and neck instead of trapping heat against a soft surface. A built-in cooling system. Centuries before anyone understood the relationship between body temperature and falling asleep. Second, raising the head even a few centimeters off a low bed or mat kept insects, sand, and crawling pests from getting into the mouth, nose, and ears overnight, which on the Nile floodplain was not a small concern. Third, the curved cradle was specifically shaped to support someone sleeping on their side, with the cheek nestled into the hollow, meaning Egyptians were, by design, largely side sleepers. Modern sleep medicine has spent the last few decades circling back to exactly those same variables. Cooler sleeping temperature, a cleared airway, and side sleeping as the position most associated with easier breathing through the night. They weren't running double-blind studies. They were running 4,000 years of trial and error in a desert and arriving in roughly the same place. The headrest mattered enough that it followed people into the afterlife. Tutankhamun's tomb was packed with 8 separate headrests, carved from wood and ivory, including one showing the god Shu, Lord of the Air, the deity who holds up the sky itself, physically supporting the spot where the king's head would rest. Even one of the earliest examples ever found, tucked quietly into the wrappings of a mummy roughly 4,600 years old, shows the same idea already fully formed. Whatever was holding your head up while you slept was important enough to take with you when you died. Here's where it gets stranger and more interesting. The Egyptians didn't think of sleep as neutral downtime. They thought of it as a nightly rehearsal for death. Every night, according to Egyptian cosmology, the sun god Ra sailed his boat into the underworld, the Duat, and had to survive 12 dangerous hours of darkness before being reborn at dawn. That myth wasn't just a story for temple walls. It was the lens through which ordinary people understood their own sleep. Going to bed mirrored Ra's descent. Waking up mirrored his rebirth with the sunrise. Funerary texts even describe the headrest itself using sunrise language. Inscriptions comparing the act of lifting your head off the headrest to the horizon lifting the sun. Strip away the mythology, and what's left is something close to a circadian model. Egyptians had no artificial lighting beyond firelight. Their sleep-wake cycle was locked directly to the sun's movement, reinforced daily by religious ritual that treated sunrise and sunset as the two most meaningful moments of the day. We now know that consistent light-dark exposure is one of the single biggest levers for healthy circadian rhythm, and that modern insomnia is disproportionately a disease of artificial light at the wrong hours. The Egyptians didn't have a word for melatonin. They had a sun god with a flawless, non-negotiable bedtime. The Egyptians also took something seriously that modern sleep advice often treats as an afterthought: the anxiety of going to sleep itself. Headrests and bed frames were frequently carved with the image of Bes, a squat, lion-maned, deliberately ugly household god whose entire job was to look frightening enough to scare off nightmares and night demons. Tauret, a protective hippopotamus goddess, appears constantly in the same role, especially around childbirth and sleeping children. small clay cobras were placed in the corners of bedrooms, forming what was essentially a symbolic security perimeter around the sleeper. Amulets went under pillows. Protective spells were inscribed directly onto the headrest itself. None of that worked in a literal sense. There's no demon-repelling property in carved limestone. But functionally, it operated as a nightly ritual that reduced anxiety before sleep. A repeated, structured, comforting sequence performed at the same time, in the same way, every single night. That is almost exactly the architecture of what sleep clinicians now call sleep hygiene. A consistent pre-bed ritual that signals to the brain it's safe to shut down. The Egyptians just used a fierce-looking household god instead of a meditation app. The last piece is maybe the most overlooked. Egyptians didn't dismiss dreams as noise. They treated them as data. Some of the oldest surviving dream interpretation texts in the world come from Egypt, listing specific dream images alongside what they were believed to predict or mean, a kind of dream dictionary, used by professional dream interpreters attached to temples. Pharaohs recorded dreams as turning points in their reign. One of the most famous involves a king receiving what he understood as a warning from a dead relative, delivered while he slept. Now, the specific belief that dreams were messages from gods or the dead isn't something modern neuroscience supports. But the instinct underneath it was pointed in the right direction. We now understand sleep, and dreaming specifically, as an active period of memory consolidation and emotional processing, not empty downtime. The Egyptians got the mechanism wrong and the importance right, which honestly puts them ahead of a huge chunk of modern history, where dreams got dismissed entirely as meaningless static for centuries. They didn't stop at ritual either. The Ebers Papyrus, a medical compilation written around 1550 BC, prescribed poppy opium specifically for insomnia, alongside its use as a pain reliever and anesthetic. That makes it, as far as the historical record shows, the first hypnotic medication ever written down. Long before anyone could explain why a sedative worked on the brain, Egyptian physicians had already isolated something that reliably did the job and started documenting the dose. They also built dedicated spaces for sleep-based healing, sleep temples, designed specifically for dream incubation, where the unwell could sleep inside the sanctuary in the hope that a god would visit them in a dream and reveal a diagnosis or a cure. It's a strange idea on the surface, but structurally, it's not far from what a modern sleep clinic does. Putting a person into a controlled environment, observing what happens while they sleep, and treating the result as clinically meaningful. The Greeks would later borrow this exact model wholesale for their own healing temples. Egypt got there first. Put it all together, and the Egyptian approach to sleep wasn't superstition layered randomly onto bedtime. It was a complete, if unscientific, system addressing the exact pillars that modern sleep medicine still organizes itself around. Physical sleep position and airway support, temperature regulation, circadian alignment with light and dark, psychological wind down before bed. And, when none of that worked, actual pharmacology. They built a cooling, side-sleeping headrest for the body. They synced their entire waking and sleeping schedule to an unchangeable cosmic clock for the circadian peace. They built a nightly ritual of protective imagery to calm the mind for the psychological peace. They treated the content of dreams as meaningful rather than disposable, and built temples around that belief. And when sleep still wouldn't come, they reached for a documented sedative instead of just praying harder. We didn't improve on the framework so much as we re-derived it, with foam, blackout curtains, and an app that tracks your REM cycles instead of a god with lion legs. So next time you're scrolling through 15 different pillow brands at 1 a.m. because you just can't get comfortable, remember, somebody in Thebes solved most of this problem with a slab of limestone, a sun god, and a deliberately terrifying house deity. And it held up for 3,000 years. If you want more ancient solutions to problems we keep pretending we just discovered, subscribe, because history keeps getting there first, and we keep being shocked about it.